raising the profile of employee engagement and shining a light on good practice for people who believe there's a better way to work.
Good afternoon and welcome to Engage for Success, or couldn't even say it then, Engage for Success radio show number 612, Badly Behaved People. And we're going to be talking about how to deal with badly behaved people at work. I'm Jo Dodds, your host for today. I'm an engagement consultant working within the Engage for Success core team. The Engage for Success movement is an inclusive movement committed to the idea that there is a better way to work by releasing more of the capability and potential of people at work. We spread the word about employee engagement and shine a light on good practice, inspiring people and workplaces to thrive. And we're widely supported across the UK, involving the public, private and third sectors. If you go to engageforsuccess.org, you can use the link at the bottom of the page to join our newsletter list, and all our social media links are there too. My guest today is Zena Everett, who's a business speaker and executive coach. Welcome, Zena. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
Lovely. So let's get started by you telling us a bit about who you are and what you do.
Well, like you said, I'm a coach, and I wrote a book called The Crazy Busy Cure a few years ago. And most of my time is spent going into organizations and talking about what gets in the way of getting things done and prioritization. But as well as that, so I spend a lot of time talking to managers and their people challenges, and I also coach. And I thought, you know what, I keep saying to people, well, when they talk about somebody else's behavior and all their problems, which are always people problems, I keep saying to them, you know, what's behind that, do you think? And they'd say, well, I don't know. I'd say, well, have you asked them? And somebody would complain about someone in their team. And I'd say, well, have you told them what you want from them? And they'd go, no. And then somebody else would complain about their senior leader. And I'd say, well, have you said that to them? And they'd go, oh, no. So I thought, right, this is really interesting. Like, there's a whole theme coming through in all these case studies. So I had great fun actually writing up Badly Behaved People, which is a sequence of a composite of my coaching case studies. So obviously, identity is hidden to protect the guilty parties. And just as a spoiler, there is one actually quite nasty person on here, but all the rest of them in here, I don't mean on this podcast, I mean in the book, but all the rest of them, they're not really badly behaved at all. They are just behaving maybe uncharacteristically under stress. And so that's what we're kind of picking apart.
Yeah, well, I was about to say, I thought from your beginning bit that you were going to tell me they weren't actually badly behaved. Yeah, so, wow, you've hooked it now. You've made me want to ask about the one that was actually badly behaved. So let's start with that one.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah, we always want the baddie, don't we? They were a really nasty manager, actually. And the person I was coaching worked for this person and had no option but to actually remove themselves away from this person. So, I mean, that's not, you know, that happens fairly infrequently in this case, where, you know, I could just see that working for this senior leader was making my client just, you know, diminish. That's the best word. Literally diminish in front of me. So they were able to move away. But that's not usually the case. And everything else has a kind of more of a simple, better communication, setting boundaries, saying to somebody, you know, this is what I need from you. What do you need from me? You know, all the kind of basics, but crazy busyness has crowded out conversation, hasn't it? So we just don't have time, or we haven't got that trust really, where we can speak to each other and ask what's going on and listen. So I wanted to really unpack all that stuff.
So what do you think, what do people say generally about people that they work with that, you know, where they're not happy? What sort of things are people saying?
Well, I did, when I sent this book out, I did ask for feedback on LinkedIn and from my own mailing lists, like, give me examples of bad behavior. And actually what was funny, there's all the intense stuff that you and I probably deal with day in, day out. But actually people were saying things like, do you know what's really driving me now is since pandemic and we're all back in the office, it seems like we've lost boundaries and we've lost awareness of other people, and it's almost like a good manners. And cooking fish in the office came up quite a bit. People were saying, I've got this person in the office and they're microwaving, this is one of my favorite, they microwave smoked mackerel at lunchtimes, and it just makes the office smell. This is a smell for the rest of the day, and they don't seem to be aware. But equally, we had kind of lost the art of saying, oh, hey, Joe, I've noticed that, when you're on your Tuesday oily fish day, and I wonder, could you microwave it in a container and keep the lid on or something? You know what I mean? But there seems to be, I think we've got a lot scratchier recently. So there's quite a bit of that stuff as well.
And so people are having these issues, and so I'm presuming, aside from sharing the case studies, you're then sharing some of the solutions which you started to sort of mention about having conversations. What sort of things should people be doing?
Well, I think for me, I say to people, look, you are in control of your own behavior. So we can't necessarily control what we think, and we can't necessarily control what's going on in our head, but we can absolutely control what we say and what we do. Mm-hmm. And we don't need to act from the power of our feelings either. There's that sort of, that came up a couple of times where people saying, oh, this is just the way I am. I lose it, but I don't mean it. And, we all know enough kind of basics about neuroplasticity to say to people, actually, you are in the driving seat of how you behave, and your runaway thoughts don't control you. So under stress, there's still no excuse for that kind of, oh, I just lost it. It was just, just had this red mist. And I had one manager who I was asked to coach, and he had very loyal staff, but he'd lose it every so often, not necessarily with a person. He didn't swear at them or anything like that, but something went wrong. They were in a sales environment and they didn't get a contract or something like that. And he would be effing and jeffing in the office and slamming things around. And
Mm-hmm.
And actually, we can't do any, we don't behave like that anymore. It's not an 80s movie. It's real life. So I just said to him, actually, how would you feel? You've got young adult children in the workplace. How would you feel if someone behaved like that to one of them? And I didn't even finish the sentence. He was like, oh God. He just had a massive blind spot in his behavior. So sometimes there is a lot of blind spots. I also find that, realizing actually I am not responsible for other people's behavior. So I can only do so much, but I can't have sleepless nights worrying about, am I making everybody happy? Because I'm not going to make everybody happy by the very nature of human beings. So I need to, be professional. I need to be kind. I need to be sensitive. But ultimately, if Bunty's in a mood, that's actually Bunty's problem. It's not mine. So I try and get people not to take themselves more seriously, but to take their roles seriously, kind of operate at that. Look, if, let me think about what high performance looks like, best professionalism in my role description, and behave in that way. And that would mean, not moaning if you're, backing up senior leadership because that's your job. All those kinds of things, creating psychological safety. But there's a balance between not overly taking ourselves too seriously either. That's kind of contradictory because I started off about you can't please everybody. But those are all the kind of things that we discussed, being accountable. And then my big thing is trying to get people to actually slow down. Slow down. I talk to managers about asking questions. They go, yeah, listen, I've been on a coaching course. I coach. I say, "All right, when do you do that?" And they'll say, "Well, I coach them on how to use the database." So, well, that's not coaching, is it? That's training. Slightly different. Or they say, "Yeah, we have key conversations, at least 3 times a year. We have a key conversation." And I coach them in that. And I think, oh my gosh, you just imagine people must dread that thinking when they're just going to say, "So, how do you feel things have gone?" That really clunky
Yeah.
stuff. So what I try and do is actually get people to slow down. So they're not causing offense in the moment, they're not firing off hasty emails, but actually they're just able to say, how things are going and what's going on, what's working well, what can we do better?
Yes. That thing about how do you think things have been going? I think my biggest bugbear of the thing that I hate managers asking is when they sit somebody down and go, "Do you know why you're here?" Like if they're going to talk about their performance or if there's been an issue or whatever. The amount of times people say that, you just think, why don't you just tell them why they're here, and then you can get going on the conversation rather than having a little quiz.
Oh, I know. And there's also that, let's just exactly a quiz. And there's also that, let's just take them out to a different room, have a chat. So you just feel someone's heart sinking. And then you just know there's a sandwich coming up, don't you? Good, bad. And then, then they let them get on with it. I mean, actually, in terms of badly behaved managers, a couple of the managers in the book were exceptionally nice people, but they're what I call mama bears. They're lovely, but they're way overprotective. And then they will say to me, my team they're not taking responsibility. They're not accountable. I think, well, why would they be when you're doing everything for them? It's basic parent, adult, child, isn't it? You're nurturing parents, wrapping them up in cotton wool. You're finishing off their work for them. You're really nervous about giving it, even fundamental, easy feedback so people know what a good job looks like. You haven't explained anything to them. They don't really know what they're doing. So of course they're not accountable. So that's often from what I see, sadly, because I love the tricky characters, but usually people are just guilty of being too what they call nice. So
yes, yeah. So the subtitle of the book is "Working with Idiots."
Yeah.
This is where I go, it's not very woke, is it?
It's not very woke. No. And my kids said, idiots, mum, like, And listen, it's how many books are published every year? Something like 5 million. And my Pearson, the publisher for this book, said, we're going to try and sell it. You've got to put the word idiots in there. So I did say in the introduction, listen, I don't call anybody an idiot. That's not me. And there are no idiots in the book, actually. So that's not me.
No.
That's SEO, isn't it? You've got to get somebody to click through on it and buy it or pick it up in a bookshop. So
yes, yeah, exactly. So the message to people who think they're working with idiots is that they're probably not, and it may be something to do with the way that they're approaching those people. Is that what we're saying?
Of course, and I mean, what's that figure, isn't there? There's something like 85% of managers are accidental managers. So that people, the big budgets, the big coaching budgets, all the training seems to be spent at the top end of organizations, but most people, therefore, by default, are working for managers who aren't well trained. And that kind of cynicism on my team are rubbish. That's because those essential pillars of getting capability right, setting expectations, all the obvious things, they're not good at that. Therefore, maybe they are behaving like idiots because you're treating them like idiots, and we have to lose that kind of viewpoint that people go to work to do a bad job. They don't. They go to work to get validation from their boss often.
Yes, yeah. And it's interesting, just saying about sort of, setting, objective standards, whatever, and regularly coaching. I mean, that's one of the things that we talk about in our 4 enablers. We talk about having, a strong strategic narrative, and for an engaging manager to be on a daily basis connecting their people with that purpose of the organization and regularly coaching. And so, as you say, when you go back to sort of managers saying, "Oh, I coach," but then you go, well, is it actually coaching? And how often do you do it? I guess the answer is probably not, every day, all day, when it should be. It's probably, as you say, 3 times a year when they think to sit down and have a specific conversation, and that's not really the point, is it?
No, it's not. And, often it can be quite drippy. And, we coach because somebody gives us a problem and you say, oh, what have you tried? And they come up with an answer that's not quite good enough. And then we tell them what we should do. And we think, oh, well, I asked a coaching question. It's always, you've got to keep going with the questions, haven't you? Let's just make it work out. So coaching is just asking questions, isn't it? It's also giving feedback with a question. So to get people to think and build self-efficacy and build engagement. But I just think we're all rushing and we don't have time. And of course, hybrid working means that we don't really have maybe we're lacking the trust, we're lacking the time, we're lacking the opportunity for serendipitous conversations that make all the difference for people.
I guess that's a question that sort of rises when you talk about sort of hybrid working or remote working and conversations and, saying that people should be talking to each other. Is it possible to do this asynchronously? Can we be having those sorts of conversations, those coaching conversations with people using, the tools like email and Slack and things like that?
Oh, listen, I don't want to sound like an old dinosaur. However, no, I don't think so. I think people are exhausted. What's the figure? 376 billion emails are sent every single day. Yeah, kind of we can do, but it's not really talking and listening, is it? And I am, unapologetically a bit old school. The best managers I coach, and like many people who do my job, we've got senior leaders who are all over the world and have remote teams, but they do make an effort to go and see them and to go and talk to them. So, but I think at least finding time to say, Joe, we're on a meeting with the rest of the team, but let's just stay on at the end because it'd be great to catch up for 15 minutes and then just listen to you, listen to you, give you feedback, ask what's working well, all those kinds of things. We can create space for that. Those tools are fine, but I think we're overwhelmed by them, aren't we?
Certainly, there's a lot of them. I guess that's where this overlaps with your previous book, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, it does. That's where it all fits in together. Of course it does. None of it's in isolation. I think we are. I think the whole crazy busyness has crowded out conversations. And so what's happened is we are just busy. We're just busy, but we're not making progress and we're not communicating well enough. So what I hear, and I'm sure you're the same, is that people are getting their work done, but it's taking longer because they're constantly interrupted and distracted, and there's all those internal meetings and so on. We have as many meetings in a day now as before COVID we had in a week. I think most of us. I like them because I'm self-employed. A meeting's good because normally there's pounds coming at the end of it. But my corporate clients are just absolutely frazzled. But again, maybe there isn't the psychological safety in some of the businesses to say, why are we having this meeting? Because actually it's at 10 o'clock on a Monday. That's when I really want to get on with my work. Let's just catch up at 4 o'clock or something. I think people need to push back a little bit. So we know people are getting their work done, but it's taking longer and they're not having deep satisfaction and, they've got this kind of rumbling anxiety, I think. And then that in turn creates bad behavior.
So in the foreword of your book, you apologise to your friends and family about your own bad behaviour. Tell us about that.
Oh, that's a bit cruel. Yeah, I know. I thought I had to stick that in. So I used to have a recruitment business and I'm a bit of an early morning person, but that's when I really like to work and to think and get on with things and plan. And one of my managers who worked for me said, Zena, you've got to realize the impact your moods have on other people, which I think I've put at the back of the book. I've got a chapter on kind of my rules. And I think that's probably number one. We set the weather. And actually everybody does, managers, non-managers, our mood, even on a screen, you can feel the vibe, can't you? And she said, look, when you come in the office and you're like, oh, hello, and you've got your head down, it's just not great because actually we're working here. We want to work for you. And that was, well, that I was a classic accidental manager, actually. That started me off on thinking, right, I need to learn how to do this properly. But nobody had really said that to me before. I didn't know. And I grew up in a house where nobody spoke to each other, well, practically ever, but certainly not before, like in the morning. So I hadn't really thought it through. But that's a great example of, my bad behavior being rectified immediately. Like, I was mortified, really grateful to get it. And it made me change my behavior straight away because I trusted them. So we fixed it.
And was it as simple as that? I mean, when we're thinking about these people who are challenged with how they do behave, from your experience, was it as simple as knowing and then being able to do something different, or did you have to?
I mean, it's it's more nuanced than this, but I think quite often, actually, once somebody's blind spot is lifted, maybe they kind of clock why they're behaving that way, but I haven't got a contract to go deep into the unchangeable early childhoods kind of thing. But I think once people realize why that they are behaving badly and the impact it has on other people, generally speaking, yeah, I'm delighted to say they deal with it. They might need some support and a little bit of a two-way street, but like my guy who was effing and jeffing in the office, once it was pointed out to him the impact he had, he stopped straight away because he was a nice guy. So, that's why we do decent feedback exercises, isn't it? To say, this is your behavior and this is the impact it has on others. This is what they say. And then they get it. Do you think that
once people know that they'll be able to change? I think where people are self-aware and people listen and are motivated to do things differently, yes, I think there is an element of what you said earlier in the interview about, well, that's just how I am amongst some people, but then I guess that sort of that feeds into everything that they do if they're not willing to look at themselves and make changes based on feedback from other people. But
and not having had feedback early enough, but I think often that the bad behavior that I write about in the book, when people's behavior is difficult and surprising, but it's often just a defense mechanism. There's a great chapter on frenemies that I really loved writing, which does happen, where all of a sudden somebody that works for you, or your best friend at work starts to do a load better than you do. And I had a great case study, which is pretty on the mark of what really happened, where somebody was slightly thrown under the bus by her former manager when she really started to excel. But actually, the former manager, she wasn't a not nice person. She was just felt under pressure and reacting in a way that she didn't like, but she kind of got stuck in it. So we were able to unpack it and give her a little bit of reassurance and make her less vulnerable. And that behavior stopped. She wasn't a bad person.
No, it's interesting that when I was first managing, maybe a little bit into my career, I did get into a situation where there was a sort of an employee who was quite difficult to work with, and it was quite difficult to give that feedback. And I think I wouldn't say that it was a bullying scenario, but it got uncomfortable. There was only a small team, and it got quite uncomfortable with the situation and the issues. And I reflected as I learned through that actually the challenge was me having the confidence to have that conversation and have those difficult conversations rather than just ignore them. Because I think if you do ignore them, it comes out in all sorts of different ways. Absolutely. And can be negative, rather than the sort of positive conversation. I think maybe that's in answer to your question about, people understanding stuff and then changing their behaviour. Sometimes it's still really difficult because you've got to have open and honest conversations with people.
You do. And also, all of this comes from good bosses where it's crystal clear, right? This is what we do. If we say the customer is at the heart of all we do, but actually we're not walking the talk on that every day, and the decisions we make and the behavior we make. And we have a value on our reception wall about kindness to colleagues and all that stuff, but we're letting this stuff go, then, you know, people get disillusioned with that very quickly, and they do move on nowadays, don't they? So I think these things are leadership problems. I mean, all of us coaches get hauled in where somebody says, like I said this right at the beginning, where somebody says, right, I've got this problem with this employee, they're doing this and they're doing that. And I say, well, they report to you, you know, how did that conversation go? And that you can just know they haven't had it. So
No.
you want to coach the leader, you don't want to coach the person, because they're floating in their own little bubble, aren't they?
Yeah. And do you think it's generational? Do you think the Gen Zs are the worst generation, worst behaved generation, as sometimes is said in more antagonistic writing, maybe, or articles, or whatever else? I mean, do you think they are an issue because of the things that they want or they don't want and how they behave and so on, or you know, is it
well, no,
all the same, really?
Well, I just think maybe they're a bit more honest than we are. I mean, I've got 2 Gen Z children, and they are entirely different characters. So I think that, you know, that they don't respond in the same way to things. But I actually think, you know, and people say, you know, what are the problems with Gen Z? Oh, they're, you know, they need lots of validation. Yeah, well, I quite like validation. I like to know what I'm doing well. Need challenging work. Yeah, well, you know, some of them have come out of education systems where they've been writing 2 hard essays a week, and then you come to work and wrap them in cotton wool and don't give them anything challenging to do, and they're not thinking, you know, no. So I do think they're more intolerant. I think they're easily distracted, possibly, but is that such a bad thing? You know, I don't do Gen Z type work, but again, I find there's a pretty, you know, not very dotted, pretty straight line between a lackluster Gen Z and a not very good manager.
Yeah, I mean, your comment about you know, well, I quite like, you know, validation or whatever else. I've always said that about the generational discussion, that you know, when I was younger, some of the things that I would have liked in the workplace didn't exist. You know, which is about the fact that it didn't exist, not the fact that I didn't want it. Whereas now we've got that opportunity to be more, you know, flexible or
But I do think they need, you know, they need more energy into managing. They need to, you know, we put them through these exhaustive interviewing processes, don't we? And then they have an onboarding, which is, you know, can be good, but seems to be, you know, pretty time consuming. But actually, they're not often given some work that blows their socks off and makes them, you know, step up straight away. It seems to be quite a long runway, and I think they are quite bored. So I think they need managers saying, right, how can we improve things right here? That, you know, keep it humble, but what are you saying? How, you know, giving them some interesting work and challenging them and pushing them, because that's what they do want. And when I see people, you know, in the course of a crazy busy session, ask, you know, dig around for how much input they get from their managers, they often say, look, my manager doesn't really know what I'm doing all day or all week. And I think, again, we're so worried about micromanaging because that was such a bad thing. I think too many people have stepped on the other side of the pendulum by actually just leaving people to get on with it. And they kind of say, oh, well, they didn't ask. But that's, again, because managers maybe haven't allowed enough time for managing. You know, they see the people stuff as an annoying distraction from their real job. So all into what you're saying about needing to slow down and spend more time on things and have proper conversations and, you know, explain to people why they do what they do and how to fit in and listen to their ideas.
Yes, yeah. So we literally have like 1 minute left. What do you want people to do differently when they have finished the book?
I would like them to, when somebody comes to them with a problem, I'd like them to, before they jump in to give a solution, I'd like them to say, what's behind that? I think that's one of my favorite questions. And to really listen to what's going on. You know, customer hasn't done this, blah, 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 unpack it, right? What's behind that, do you think? and then not say anything.
Brilliant. It's a really good end to the show. Thank you very much, Zena. It's been really good talking to you today. Thanks for that.
My pleasure.
And just let you know, next week we've got Joe Moffat back with Antonio Weiss, and they're talking about AI and digital technology.
Engage for Success Radio, raising the profile of employee engagement and shining a light on good practice for people who believe there's a better way to work.